Hello, these are the slides that I showed at the Gardening Australia Expo in Brisbane in May 2007. This is the house as it was originally when we bought it in September 2003. Flat, the soil was as hard as bitumen, there were no earthworms, but we did have dung beetles, and about half of the garden was covered with nutgrass. We installed systems for sustainable living, a rainwater tank, water efficient appliances. We did some landscaping in the front garden and installed a stormwater soakaway pit, and our pride and joy is of course our sewage system, which recycles water for the toilet, and we use the excess water for growing food. Here you can see the garden in February 2007, and a lot of reporters said that the garden looked very lush, and indeed it does, but this is apparent lushness because the soil underneath was really dry to about 2 metres down, so all this greenery is supported in our productive garden on 350 litres of recycled water a day. In December 2003, the CSIRO brought out a report on climate change for Australia. They break up the country into climatic regions and they look at what the climate change implications are going to be in about 50 years and 100 years' time. Most of the predictions on this slide are known to gardeners, but the most important things for gardeners are that showers are starting to contract all the way along the eastern coast towards the coast and away from our catchment areas. The other thing is that rainfall is likely to occur in heavy events that are more widely separated. So a successful garden is one that can capture all that rain when it falls and use it to bridge the gaps between those rainfall events. And this is really important. Landscapers have got to learn to treat stormwater as a resource. Instead of treating it as something that has to be got rid of from a site as quickly as possible, it has to be captured, put into the soil to allow gardens to bridge those longer gaps between the heavy rainfall events. We use a rain gauge to keep the rainfall records at Bellis, and this slide shows the green, which is the 50-year average rainfall for Brisbane Airport, which corresponds to the area where we live, and the yellow is the records of the rain that we've collected. You can see in January 2004 we had an above average fall of rain, but we hadn't got the rainwater tank installed at that stage, and so we lost all that water. Then followed a distinctly dry autumn and winter, and during this period we were trying to rejuvenate the soil with added compost and green manure. We were unable to keep the green manure going, so towards the end of winter, about July, we had to slash that down and cover it with sugarcane mulch while the composting process stalled. It did pick up again when the rains arrived in October. But one of the interesting things about heavy dumping rains, you can see from December we had what appeared to be a very wet month, but the rain fell on 3 successive mornings in 1 week in December. Flooding rain absolutely overflowed Wynnum Creek, where you couldn't get four-wheel drives to navigate the road, and all the neighbouring properties with concrete paths, compacted soil and gutters emptying into the streets added to the stormwater surge. Now our garden was prepared. We didn't lose much water from our garden. We collected water in our rainwater tank, so we decreased the loss of stormwater quite significantly. The implications for this in developing urban areas is that the more stormwater you generate, the more likely you are to have flash flooding. And just downstream at the end of Wynnum Creek towards the bay, St Columba's Terrace has a number of houses which regularly flood as a result of stormwater dumped into the creek from poorly designed gardens. In 2005 we had less rainfall than the previous year, but we did have a spectacular fall in June. This was when we had 123 millimetres of rain fall in 3 hours. Now I'd expected some ponding in our lawn which was designed to capture stormwater, and it's prepared to turn into a temporary pond so that we don't lose any of that water. However, our garden managed to save all the water. It soaked it up through the soil. The rainwater tank overflowed. we have a system of underground agricultural drainage pipe, 1/2 metre deep, which collects the water from the overflow of the tank, directs it deep down into the soil, and waters it far deeper than most showers of rain can ever penetrate. Now, this system of pipes collects water from the nursery area. It prevents water from going underneath our house to keep the stumps of the Queenslander dry, and waters the soil very deeply. Once this soil becomes saturated, the drainage pipe then discharges the water into the soakaway pit in the front of the garden. As a result of this one fall of rain, our soil was watered to 1/2 metre deep. We had a full rainwater tank, and the front garden was watered as well. And we lost hardly any stormwater from our site. This was when we found that all the systems we put in place to capture and make full use of rain actually worked. 2006 was a dry year again, and you can see that we did have certain spikes of rainfall. What I learnt in 2006 was to become an opportunistic gardener. So when we had wet weather and the soil was moist, that would be when I would be planting, inserting cuttings into the garden and sowing seeds. There's a lot of jobs that didn't get done, but by being an opportunist and using quick performing plants like annuals when the soil was moist, I was able to minimise the amount of watering that was necessary and grow some food. So here you can see the rainfall records compared with the average. We've had 3 distinctly dry years right from the start of establishing the project. We didn't really expect to have to crash test it. However, we have proven that it is possible to grow food and a garden during the worst recorded drought in Australian history. This is the layout of the garden. It's more or less accurate today. You can see the house in the centre where we collect our water from the roof. On the right hand side is our ornamental garden with a subtropical effect. That's hardly ever watered. It's only the hedge and 2 pot plants that get regular watering. The rest is designed to cope with natural rainfall. The grey areas are the gravel path and drive, which are water absorbing surfaces, and in the back garden, our productive garden, the brown areas are covered with mulch. Now, the gravel and mulch, they collect rainwater, slow it down and allow it to soak into the ground, so they become absorbing surfaces. The green rectangle is our sustainable lawn, and the timber edge has been raised 15 centimetres above the level of the surface of the soil. The edges have been sealed so that it acts as a water catchment area and the lawn is level. So we can collect up to 150 millimetres of rain in one fall without losing any rainwater. In the back garden, we have our productive fruit trees planted around the borders, around the periphery of the garden. The rainwater tank in blue is in the top left-hand corner. That's where we store our water. And I have 8 vegetable beds, so I can practice crop rotation and grow some stuff for showing on television as well as feeding the household.